Welcome to another episode of Women in the Military podcast. I'm excited to talk to Necole about her experience in the military, and I'm excited because it's another international guest. She's from Canada, and so she's going to talk about her experience in the Canadian military, or I guess I should say Royal Canadian Military. I'm learning new things, and so I'm really excited to not only hear about her experience in the military, but to learn a little bit more about another country's military service. So, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm excited as well.
So, let's start with why did you decide to join the military?
Well, I'd like to say that made that decision while I was in the womb. My mother was pregnant for me. I was her third child, and we lived in Halifax, Nova Scotia at the time. And we were going across she was going across the Sir John A. Macdonald Bridge at rush hour with my father, and they were in a taxi because I was born in 1963, and my father didn't have a vehicle back then. So he was trying to put the dime in the basket because you had to pay a toll to go across the bridge, and he kept missing because he was very nervous. So the military police who were there at the time were laughing at him, and this is all recounted from my parents, but were laughing at him, and finally they decided that they were going to give him an escort across the bridge. So, I say that I heard those sirens in the womb, and that's all I ever wanted to do. But when I was 5, I knew that I was going to join the military. I was going to follow in my father's footsteps, and that's exactly what I did. As I grew up, I never wavered. I continued to want to be a military police officer, and I actually waited almost 4 years to get in because I enrolled in 1984, or tried to. Like, I went to a recruiting center and signed my name. However, because the occupation that I wanted, which was military police, was closed at the time because we were going through a downsizing, I couldn't get in, and I did not want any other occupation. So I waited and I waited and I waited, and in 1987, I got the call, and I got to do basically my dream job. They paid me, and I would have done it for free because I don't think there's any greater honor than to defend your country. And I did
I
it for
love
35 years.
Yeah. I love hearing that you have this story from the very beginning, and then, you have your dad served in the military, so that had huge impact on your life. And I we're recording this in March, even though it's going live in June, but I was working on an article for military for Spouse Link, and I was writing about how the generations of service between, parents serving and then their children serving, and how it's such a great legacy. And it was really interesting to hear from different people about their experience. And so your story really resonates with the stories that I wrote in that article. And so that's really cool. So in the United States, we celebrate the month of the military child in April. And so that's why I was working on that article. Um, so,
Yeah, that's
but
amazing. But yeah, I would watch him come home in his uniform. I would wear his shoes, everything, and I don't know. It was truly the only thing I ever wanted to do, and I got to work with amazing people. I got to do amazing things. I got to experience, other cultures, different countries, and despite what happened to me in my last 3 years of my career, I would do it all over again. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the recruiting process. It sounds like in 1984 they were only a few jobs were open. They were trying to draw down the military, and you wanted to join, but you knew what career field you wanted to do. So were you kind of just in this limbo period waiting? What was going on in your life while you were waiting?
So our recruiting process is a little bit different. We have a brick and mortar recruiting center, but we also now into the digital age, you can go online. But for me, it was a brick and mortar place. My father took me the day I graduated from college, and off we went. And I got in there. I did all the testing because we have aptitude tests where you have to get a certain score, and you can either choose to be an officer or you can choose to be a non-commissioned member. And in my case, I wanted to be a non-commissioned member because I actually wanted to do the job and not do the sort of more white collar stuff that the occupation takes care of. So I finished the aptitude test, and at that point, I was, you know, I was afraid because I am a member of the LGBTQ community, and back then it was illegal to be a member of that community and join the military. So I had to keep that hidden, and they asked me, outright, "Are you a member of this community?" So that was the first time I had to really lie, cheat, and steal, because I basically lied and I said, "No, I'm not." And I cheated the military in that I was trying to enroll under false premises. And then, I stole a heterosexual identity, and I kept that identity for a long time. And when it came to, we have to make three choices. Well, you're supposed to, three different choices of what you want to be for your job. And I wrote military police, military police, military police. And the recruiter said, "Well, you got to pick two different ones." And I said, "No, I don't. I've written down my three, but I'm not writing anything else." And he's like, "Well, you should be in, something to do with aircraft because you're really smart." And I'm like, "No, I don't want to. I want to be an MP." And so anyway, that occupation was closed because we were downsizing, but not every occupation was. So they were, trying to force you into occupations that were um, had did not meet their quota yet, and I wouldn't do it. So essentially, I waited, almost 4 years. And when I got to our recruiting center, when I got the call, and I was worried for 4 years because I thought, you know what, they must have just figured out that I was gay, and I'm not going to get in. And I worried about that, and I worried about that. But every day I would wake up going, "Is this the day? Is this the day?" And that's how bad I wanted it. And finally, that call came. And while I was waiting, I did odd jobs and really nothing. I didn't exist because I wanted that, and that's all I wanted. And I didn't want to enter into another occupation that would cause me to have to make a decision. So finally, that call came, and off I went, and I never looked back. And they didn't know at the time, but it wasn't long before they figured out that I was in that community. But I still had to hide in plain sight for a very long time.
Yeah.
So I joined the very trade that was seeking out homosexuals, and then I hid underneath that sort of umbrella, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah. I really liked when you talked about, like, they were like, "Pick 3 things," and you were like, "Nope, I want 1." And I think that's really good advice for, young women or men who are listening. Like, especially right now, the military needs you, and they might want you to go on this career field that hasn't met the quota, but really they need you. And if you wanna do a job, you should wait for that job, and you should fight for that job, because it's going to have a huge impact on your life, very little impact on the recruiter's life on the grand scheme of things. But like, if you want to do a job, don't compromise and do something that you don't want to do, because that will affect your time in the military. It would change your whole story, and you probably wouldn't be as happy as being in a job that you really want to do. So I think
Oh,
that's a really important thing to highlight. Go ahead.
I agree so much. Like to wait that long was fine because at the end of that rainbow was that pot of gold. And, because I wanted it so badly, I was the best that I could be. I was happy. I was doing a job I loved. I was, working with people that were amazing. Like when I got into the recruiting place where we go, which was called Cornwallis, Nova Scotia, where you spend 13 weeks learning how to be a soldier. There were 13 MP. No, there were two female MPs, myself and another woman, and 11 male MPs in a platoon of about 170 people. So, naturally we became very close because we were, the only military police in a Navy platoon on top of that. But all of them waited like less than 2 weeks because they were all joining, when the trade opened. And I had to wait that long, but it didn't matter. And like I said, I would do it all over again because I got to experience stuff that no other Canadian gets to experience, like a non-service member.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your boot camp, and so you said it was 13 weeks, and then and you, even though you guys are all mixed together, you guys kind of knew you guys were all doing becoming MPs, so you kind of like gravitated together and were together for those 13 weeks. And then after you graduated, did you have tech school? That's what the Air Force calls it in the US, or did you have a training school that you went to for MPs specifically?
So when we all graduated, we're a bilingual country, so we had to go to French language training or English language training, but mostly French. And we spent 6 months there together. Now, if you could speak both languages, you got exempt, and then you would go off and do what we call PAP platoon. So it's personnel awaiting training. But all of us went to French school and we spent another 6 months together. Then, when we graduated from there with our French language profile, then we went to our tech school. And our tech school is in Borden, Ontario. And that's where the Military Police Academy is.
And
Yeah.
how long was that school?
That's 6 months. Yeah.
Wow.
To
So
do
you
tech
had a
school.
lot of training,
Yeah.
13 weeks, and then 6 months, and then another 6 months. So over a year and almost like a year and a quarter, year and a half.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like, so
I'm
if
like,
you
I can do
break it
math.
down, I went to recruit school in November 12th of 1987, and I did not get to my first active posting or active duty till February of 1989.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah. So like a year and 4 months.
yeah,
That's yeah, that's a lot of training. But I mean, learning another language, that's intense. So that makes a lot of sense. And then of course learning the job and then the boot camp. I mean, I think there's a lot of training on our in all the military branches, but we don't have that foreign language piece unless you're doing like a specialized trade. But that's really interesting to hear. And so, was it important to know both French and English in the Canadian military?
Amanda, that's a really good question. Yes, it is. It is imperative for our officers at the rank of major. If you do not have a certain profile, you're not being promoted to a full colonel, a full bull. It as a non-commissioned member, you can go through the ranks, and our ranks are a little bit different than yours because your chief warrant officer is a tech staff, right? They're not. They're more like an officer.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the Air Force technically just added chief warrant officers, so I don't really understand how
Okay.
they work because they didn't have them when I was in the Air Force. But
Okay.
yeah, there's like enlisted, then the warrant officers, and the warrant officers are supposed to be more like specialized, focused on their career. But they do a lot more management, and then like yeah, officers is more like white collar type work.
Okay. So for us, our enlisted starts at private and it goes all the way to chief warrant officer. We don't differentiate, but when you become a chief, you become a separate occupation, so much like your warrant officers.
Okay.
And when you hit that chief warrant officer level, you need a French language profile or an English language profile. Otherwise, you are not going any further than chief warrant officer. And well, I say further, but chief warrant officer has appointments, so different levels we have. So we have what's called the like our entry level chief warrant officer, where that's where they continue to do their occupation. And then we have a key position chief warrant officer, where they may stay in their occupation, but they're doing jobs that might be for the institution or for the overall branch of your occupation. Then we have a senior appointment chief warrant officer, which is where you become the chief warrant officer of a wing or a base or a ship. And then we move to what's called a level 2 chief, and that's a divisional chief. And then your level 1 chief is your command chief. So your OR9s for a command. And then you have, and there was 8 of them when I was there, and then you go to the 1 position. So you have 8 people fighting for 1 position, which is our CAF chief warrant officer. So yeah, that's how that works. So it's a pyramid system, and there's a lot at the bottom. So there's about 500, let's say 540 chief warrant officers in the Canadian Forces, and we're like supposed to be 69,000 strong. And then as you go up, that pyramid gets smaller and smaller. So if there's 500 down here, you go to roughly 270 at the next level, then about 90 some, then 8, then 1. So it's yeah, or 90 to 32 to 8 to 1. So it gets quite competitive, and if you don't
Yeah.
have French, you're not gonna move past that bottom pyramid.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
would never. I mean, I guess I kind of knew that in the back of my mind that it's. I've only been to Canada once, and I think I was in an English-speaking area, but I also didn't really interact with
Mhm.
Canadians, and it was a very touristy place. So who
Yeah.
knows? For sure,
But
I
we
was
have
a
to.
family reunion, so
Yeah.
yeah,
We have to have a second language because our troops have the right to speak in either language. And if you don't understand them, you can't speak to half of our
right,
population. And you're supposed to be the leader and in the human domain. We, as chief warrant officers, that's our expertise in the human domain. And if you can't speak to half of the service, then you're no good.
right,
So absolutely, it's imperative. It's difficult, but it's something that is made very clear at the early end of your career. It's not a surprise. So if you don't have it by the time you're a chief warrant officer, and you can't say, "Well, I didn't know," because it is communicated all throughout, and we offer training, not just in after recruit school, but we offer training throughout your career.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating and a different layer of like part of being part of the Canadian force and just that's really interesting.
Mhm.
So you said that you finished your training and you got your first assignment in 1989. So what was that like?
Well, that was very difficult because I asked for a French posting. So I went to a French province. I went to Saint Jean, Quebec, and I was probably maybe one of 2 English speakers there. But I really wanted to learn French, and when I went to French language school, I got my profile, as what we say if you achieve a certain standard, and then I went to my tech training, but my tech training was all in English. So I lost all the stuff that I had in French, had learned. So I wanted to go back because I knew how important it was. So I went back there, and for the first year, it was so hard. I came home every night with a massive headache because you're trying to understand what they would say. And it was funny because I would always they'd send me to one place because I was on patrol then, and they'd say, do go there, do this, and then take it to here, X and Y. And I'd always end up in Y, and they'd be like, "Aren't you coming?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'll be right there." So then I knew I was in the wrong spot, right? Or people would phone, and of course my name is very French. It's Nicole Belanger. So I would say I would answer the phone, but I had to speak French. So I'd be like, "Police ministère sur de Belanger, bonjour," and they'd be like, "Blah, blah, 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 blah," and I would have no clue what they were saying, right? So I would be like in French, "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." Because I couldn't understand them, right? So, and then it's really hard when you're on a radio because you can't see people's lips moving. and you can't, you know, concentrate on their facial expressions. So it was difficult. And then writing on top of that, because I'd have to write police reports. Like, I think I killed 3 trees, like massive oak trees or whatever, like, you know, 100-year-old trees. I probably killed them doing one report, because I, you know, like it'd be riddled with spelling mistakes. So anyway, after about a year, my boss came to me and he says, "Would you like an English language posting?" And I'm like, "God, no! I just learned how to speak French." And it was like one morning I woke up and it was like it clicked, and I understood, and I learned, you know, I could write and I could speak, and yeah. And then the next day he asked me if I'd like a posting. I'm like, yeah, no, no. Had you asked
You're
me a
like,
week
"I've got
before,
this."
yeah, I got this now. And it was the best thing I ever did. And then it was funny because my next posting, I was the first corporal to be posted to our military police academy to instruct. And I went there, and Amanda, they did not have any training in French for our entry level military police. So guess who ended up writing it all, right? And teaching it. And I got even better at French. So
So
yeah,
So going to that first assignment and really learning French, like you said, you had learned it for 6 months, but then you lost it because if you, it's kind of like you lose it if you don't have it. Like, yeah. So
yeah.
learning, and then you immersed yourself in it, like having to write, having to speak, and then you were talking about like radios and phone calls and like all these different things. So you really like learned, and then I think that's interesting that you were in it for so long, and then it wasn't like slowly over time, it was like all of a sudden everything just fell into place and it clicked. So that's kind of interesting to hear how that all worked. And then you got to keep practicing it. So then, as you went from both roles, you were certified and ready to go in both French and English because now they were kind of almost native to you. I mean, obviously French was your second language, but you really got to know it. You didn't just learn it in a classroom. You got to learn it and use it and understand it.
Oh yeah. And like sometimes because there are, just like the English language, there are multiple words for, or different, there are different spelling for, and different words for the same thing. And sometimes you get a little mixed up, but you know, the people of Quebec, um, they would just correct you, you know, and kind of laugh and say, "Well, it's this word." And it was fantastic because they never made fun of you or anything. And if you wanted to speak French, they would allow you to do that, because sometimes, you know, it's very hard for them to understand if your French is broken and all that. But if you wanted to practice, they would automatically, you know, switch to the French language because most of them can speak English. And and I found often like they would switch to English to make it simpler on me, and I would keep talking in French. So then they realized that I wanted to learn, and they became even more open to you, and and then they would teach you. And you know, for example, like there are couple words for the term work, right? There's work for job, and then there's it doesn't work, as in something doesn't work. And you know, so you would, if you only knew the term travail, which is to work, to go to work, and you were trying to put that into a sentence about the door does not work, so la porte ne travaille pas, they would they would laugh and they go, well, it's not actually travail, and then they would tell you the word, right? So that it was really good. And I when I was in my first posting, I lived in like a family unit, so the people inside of there um would teach me different French words every night. So I, you know, not only was I learning it on the job, but I was getting it at where I lived, and we would watch TV in French and all that. So it was very helpful, very
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah,
I love hearing that they were, like, supporting and helping you learn the language and then be like, "That's funny, but no, that's not right." And
yeah,
like, it is kind of funny that you used a word in the wrong way, but then they totally helped you. So
yeah.
that's really cool. And you took it upon yourself where you could have been like, "Okay, I'll just speak English because that's easier." Instead, you were like, "No, I wanna learn French." That's why I'm here. And so I think that shows your like drive and initiative, and even like going back to like waiting for the job that you wanted. Like you knew what you wanted and then you went and got it. So I think that's a really great lesson.
I did that with my promotions as well, because we, I mean, I joined in the 80s. There was some ostracization. We didn't always do diversity, inclusion, and equity. So inclusion was like a foreign topic to most people. Well, the white male, right? Because war is designed to attract the white male. And
Hmm.
then we look at white privilege, which they can't even get, they don't examine it, but even if they knew that they had it, they couldn't give it back, right? Because it's just something that's inbred in society. So I had to work really hard to continue to be promoted, and I had to make it impossible for the military to ignore me. Um, where some women didn't do that and they didn't proceed past certain ranks. So to get to a chief warrant officer as a woman is quite difficult. Not so much anymore, but it was back when I was being promoted. And then to get to senior appointments, like where I ended up, there was only ever 2 women that held that job, and that job's been in existence, like that position. The command chief warrant officer has been in existence since 1978, and only 2 women have held it. So is it that we're not capable, or is it that we need to be a bit more inclusive? And our military is endeavoring to do that through a new command that we've put together called CPCC. So it's Professional Code of Conduct issues that they will take on a larger strategic ground, and then pass it down through the military, making policies and procedures, and making sure that everything we do is inclusive in nature, so that everyone has a chance to prosper in our military, not just the white male.
Yeah. Yeah, I know you're using words that I feel like when I was in the military in the early 2000s, mid, I would like someone asked me, "Were you sexually harassed?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, yes, there was harassment, but it was kind of just that was the way it was." And like it's really sad to say it, but it was like it was just that's kind of how people treated people, and it wasn't really something we talked about, and we didn't really, advocate for ourselves. It was a really different time, and it's really interesting to see how
Mhm.
much change has happened since I left the military, and talking about these things that were words that I wouldn't have understood, even 5 years ago. And so I think it's really good that the military is working, internationally to change for the better and to make things more important. But one of the things you talked about is how you like advocated for yourself, and you made it so that like you would get promoted because you had, all the boxes checked, everything you needed to get done. So I really want to talk about like what kind of things are really important for you to do in the military so that you can advocate for yourself, because I think so many times people, especially women, we are like, okay, well, someone's going to take care of it, it'll be fine. And then it's not, because we haven't advocated for ourselves. And it's important to advocate for yourself because that's your record is your record, and you're the only person who, really cares about it because it affects your life the most.
Um, you hit the nail on the head. But the fact of the matter remains, we are women, and we do not promote ourselves very well. When we speak while we're speaking the same language, like we're speaking English, we're speaking a foreign language to most men. In that, if we have a task to do, it is we did this, our team. It's never I. It's never, well, look what I did. We don't want to be in the spotlight. And unless you are pushing yourself out there, nobody's going to shine that light on you. So it's exactly what you said. So for me, I had to make sure that, I had at least 2 courses in a year done, whether that was, a military course or a civilian course in education, or some type of training, inclusive training, whatever the case may be. You had to keep your French active. You got points for being for having an education. I took my what we call our officer professional development program, which is mandatory for our officers, but it was open to non-commissioned members, are enlisted, and most people didn't do that. So I finished that program. So I automatically got points every year for it. You had to make sure that your physical education was up to date and that you took your thing. So throughout my career, I did that every year. So I always got automatic points for having a college diploma and a university degree, which is atypical of an enlisted leader in our military. It's getting more common now, but back then, not a lot of people had post secondary education. It was a grade 12 or less because that's what we accepted. So I made sure that, that was on there. I made sure that my officer professional development was on there because you would get points for that, just like the officers did. And so I took advantage everywhere I could. And, when I needed a deployment, I went on a deployment, and you would get those points. And for us, big points too were your flexibility of service. So I had, throughout my career, I was probably posted transferred maybe 16, 17 times in a 35-year career. So it was a lot, and especially at the rank of warrant officer, because I knew my goal, even when I joined as a young private, was to make it to chief warrant officer, to make it to the highest rank. And I did not let anything stop me. I did what I needed to do, sometimes to my own detriment, but I had a goal and I wanted to achieve it, and I did. And I actually got farther than I thought I would, because I did some stupid things when I was younger and, having fun. But yeah, so like I said, you make sure that, the system cannot ignore you, because if they do, there'll be questions. And they'd be questions about why was this person not chosen, because they meet all the criteria. and
Yeah.
and you know only you can do that for yourself. So
Yeah, know what is required. I know that in the Air Force, when you're enlisted, there's tests that you have to take, and those have a really big impact. So, studying for those tests, making sure you're ready for those tests, physical fitness is important, all the things, your education, all the things that really matter, so that you can get promoted. Make sure you know what you need to do. Like, it sounds like not only did you know what you needed to do, but then you went and did it. So, it's like a two-part piece. Because if you don't know what important things need to be on your evaluation report, then you can do all these things, but you don't know if they're the right things. So
yeah, and I
and
was
the
very fortunate because I had a mentor who taught me all that stuff. So another female in my occupation, military police, it started out, it was her husband who was mentoring me on my first posting to the French language base. And because there and then when he retired, she who was also a military police took over, and I didn't even know that she was watching my career. But every time there'd be a major decision to be made, or I had to, do something, I would get a call out of the blue from this lady. And I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but then I figured out that she was mentoring me, so she taught me all this stuff. And what I did was, I didn't want people to have to go through what I went through, so I taught it down. And it's important that you know what your career entails it and what you need, and the administrative part of it. And I kept that throughout my entire career, was to make sure that people knew what they needed to do to get promoted. People knew what they needed to do to get to a certain location. People knew what they needed to become a chief warrant officer, because chief warrant officers are it's once you get there, it's all, I don't want to say cloak and dagger, but um it's not as widely known as the other ranks, because it from private to master warrant officer, our evaluation system is the same. At chief warrant officer, it changes. And unlike you guys, we don't have to write tests to be promoted. We get promoted on our merit and our potential to achieve the next rank, but our potential is based on education, it's based on fitness, it's based on, a lot of other things, diversity of employment. Are you capable of, serving the institution as opposed to just your occupation? And do you want to? Because you also get a vote in this. And if you don't want to be posted every 1 to 3 years, then you just opt out of being succession managed, is what we call it. But yeah,
Yeah.
to have a mentor, especially as a female, is big in our military, and because they can talk about you in circles that you're not at, and especially if you have a male mentor, it's even better because they're in that inner circle, right? And you're looking out into the cheap seats and from the cheap seats, and if you're not somebody that's on their conversation list or they don't know you, it's very hard to break that ceiling and get inside there.
Yeah. I just did an interview with Sabrina Dalton about mentorship, and she is one of the leaders for military mentors. And she talked about how important mentorship is and like some of the misnomers about mentorship, and about how sometimes people think, advice one time is mentorship. It's a continual relationship where they're like continually checking in on you, and you build a relationship over time. And it really, I mean, and they really can have an impact on your career, because if a mentor knows what your goal is, then they can be, an advocate for you. And so it's it's so important. And I think the military talks a lot about mentorship, but then they don't explain what mentorship is. And so that's why I did that episode with her, because I wanted to highlight, I learned a lot in the interview with her, but mentorship is so important, but we don't talk about like how do you find a mentor, what does it mean to be a mentor, and like what does it mean to be a mentee? So I think
Mhm.
that's really important.
Yeah, and
So go ahead.
you're right about the misnomer because a lot of people who it's not explained to them, like who have a mentor, but it hasn't been explained what the role of the mentee and the mentor are. That sometimes the mentees think that the mentor is going to fix the problem for them, but that's not the case, right? Or
Right.
it shouldn't be the case. And where the mentor is, provides advice, and that's all they provide. But it's up to the individual to make the choice, and that's what I had, and I wanted to give that back, and I pretty sure I achieved that in my career. My mentees will might say differently, but I don't think so. And as a matter of fact, even retired, I continue to keep a couple of them, just because I want to see where they get to. And I also, some of the other ones that I had a longer term relationship with, that are outside of the Royal Canadian Air Force. They might be in the Royal Canadian Navy or the Canadian Army. I've passed them on to somebody I trust to mentor them. But if you're, and I have you ever read Athena Rising?
No, I'll have to add that to my list.
Oh my goodness, what a phenomenal book. Um, and they talk in there about mentorship, and they talk about the male. If you're only mentoring somebody who looks like you, who smells like you and acts like you, essentially you're mentoring the wrong person, because you need to open mentorship up and explore, like to have a male mentor. Like I said before, they're talking in circles that you can't even get to. So they're pushing your file, which is fantastic, right? And they see things from a different lens than we do, right? Everyone has a different set of goggles that they're looking at, because of all their different experiences that we bring to the table, and that's that diversity piece. And so to have a male mentoring a female, is a great thing if you can get past the judgment. Well, he's just mentoring her because she's young and beautiful and he's going to get something. And we've heard it all, right? But not true. We need to have that. Like I also, like I was fortunate. I had 3 or 4 mentors throughout my career, and I had a male mentor who, looked out for me in circles that I could never get to. And this was as a chief warrant officer. And so I was very, very fortunate. And like my whole career has been a fortunate situation, for the most part. But we do have, you mentioned it. Were you sexually harassed? Well, back then we didn't talk about it. Were you sexually assaulted? Back then we didn't talk about it because you were the weak link. If it happened, it was your fault, right? And for us, it was the same thing. It was, well, he's a better technician than she is, so we'll keep him, and we'll kind of, if she's going to tell, she's not a team player.
Right.
So, a lot of women experience that throughout their career. And what that teaches you is don't expose yourself, right? Don't go and make a statement, because it's going to be, for the most part, your word against his. And we're trying to change that now with our new command and all that. But essentially, that's yeah. So you make
Yeah.
it, yeah. So yeah, it's mentorship
Yeah.
is so important.
It was easier to just keep your mouth shut because when you opened your mouth, then you got blowback or nothing happened, and then you were, and then you ended up with like egg on your face, and it
Yeah.
was just, yeah. I had an experience in college where something really bad happened, and I went to my leadership, and they were like, "Well, he's about to leave, and da 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 da," and so they didn't do anything, and I realized, in years past, like when I was in the military, that one instant where like he was clearly in the wrong and I said something and nothing was done,
Hmm.
it kind of taught me that there's no point in speaking up because you're just gonna, nothing's gonna happen. The person's gonna get away with it.
Yeah.
And that was that was kind of how I felt, so it was easier, and I'm glad to see that things are changing, but I still don't think it's easy. I don't think people should say like it's easy to stand up and, say this is wrong. It's still really challenging. That's why you need mentors to like have your back and give you advice and, give you encouragement when things don't go the way you hope they do.
So I have a similar experience to you. I was sexually assaulted when I first joined the military, um, and basically sexually harassed for a lot of years. But you, like you keep quiet, because I saw in society, you know, how the victim was treated. Yeah, I was in the very occupation that interviewed people for this, and I saw how that was done. And I didn't want to lose my career. I had waited, my entire life and essentially since the womb, to get into the military. I didn't want to be kicked out. So I kept it very quiet. But, it is not easy to stand up. And I lived a lie for 35, well, for my entire career. And it didn't come out until the very end of my career, when I was going for my release medical. I had hid it the entire time. Like, I had one supervisor tell me that I should have been exterminated with the Jews. Yeah. Um, I had others say they were going to F the gay right out of me. Just different things that, I had one that if I gave him a blow job, I would get the posting of my choice. And people would, make comments about, who's the man in your relationship, all this stuff. So you kept it really, you never talked about it, right? And then in my last 3 years were where I was up at the big boy table. I was so, in the first year, unwanted there. And, when I joined the military, it was a great sin to be gay. When I got to the very top, it was an even worse sin to be a female, because that's, not. Anyway, and then it got a little bit better, but essentially, where I should have had my biggest voice, I was silenced. I could not make change. I had to go with the status quo because they would just ignore you. And you're one of eight, so you're the minority. And for a lot of women who sit at a table where they're the only female, it's it's almost impossible. Like, I would say something, and they do the little head bob, right? And then, some guy 2 seats down from me would repackage what I said just in simpler terms, and then they'd all be like, "Oh my God, that's a brilliant idea!" And it's like, really? I just said that, right? So I call it the sheep eat. So
CP, I like
yeah,
that.
the sheep eat, right? They just repeat what you said, and everyone thinks it's brilliant, but you're an idiot because that's the way they were looking at you because they didn't understand what you were saying. It's like you were speaking a foreign language. But in my last year, I went for my physical and to get out of the military, and I had told this lie my entire career that nothing had ever happened to me. It was great. It was fantastic. Um, and and then my doctor asked me one question, and that's when my trauma expired, and everything came out. And I don't know why it came out. I don't know because I didn't go in there certainly planning on disclosing everything, but it was like I have verbal diarrhea of the mouth, and it just started pouring out of me, and like I was shocked. So I I came home and I had to be honest with my family because essentially throughout my entire career, what I was going through, even though I was striving to do all this stuff, I was leading almost a double life. At work, I was totally put together and this, like superwoman, and then at home, I was an alcoholic, an abuser, like not physically, but mentally. I was a workaholic. I had to work so hard to, I thought, get promoted and do that I would work well into the night and be 5 weeks ahead of my jobs. Like somebody would say, "Oh, could you do this?" It's 3 weeks is the deadline. I'd have it done the next day. So it it cost. It was a heavy toll, and it was a big price to pay simply because I wanted to get to the top, and I regret that. But that's if I had hindsight, I wouldn't have done it that way. I still would have done everything I could to get promoted, but I might not have done the damage that I did at home. Um, is like I missed my. We have two children, and I missed them both growing up. So I thought, since my whole life has been about making change, and I couldn't make change at the very top. So because my voice was stifled, so I thought they're not going to stifle me in writing. So I wrote a book and I disclosed everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you talked to like you had a person you had to be at work, and then you had the person who was just trying to keep everything together, and
Yeah.
so you put all your effort into like staying together at work, and then you were falling apart at home. And I
Yeah.
mean that's shows the detriment of like in the United States it was called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, of like what the challenge was for people who are in situations like that where you're trying to keep part of who you are hidden, and how that affects you mentally, physically, in all sorts of ways. So I think um it's really so let's talk about your book.
Okay.
I was like, I
um,
don't know what question to ask. Let's talk about this book and all the stuff that you wrote about.
well, okay. So my book is called Pride Amid Prejudice. Um, and it goes from basically from the time I was in the womb right up till the time I retired. But it does talk about the institution and how difficult it was. But it also talks about my family life. And what I didn't know, well, I mean, I knew, but I lied about it, was we had a very abusive family life in that my father, being military, um, was an abuser, both physically and mentally. So that I stuffed down, and I sort of became a pleaser because my brother and sister would kind of take the heat for me, me being the baby of the family. And, we all three of us well, four of us, my mother included, went through some, really bad times, but we stuck together. And then when I joined the military, and, like basically because I was gay, my father thought I should be committed to an institution because that's not normal, and my mother wanted to know where she went wrong, but she didn't mean that in a bad sense. She just, like, my brother and sister are straight, so she didn't do anything differently raising me. So how can I be that way? But what they don't she didn't understand that this is, um, it's a gene. It's not something I could control because, trust me, nobody would pick this life. And if you ask any gay person, nobody would pick this life. Like, getting beat up, getting harassed, getting, kicked out of your family home, all that stuff. Like, nobody asked for that. And nobody wants it. Just like I didn't have a choice if I was left-handed. So I finally disclosed all that. Um, and everyone thought I had this wonderful family life, right? Like, even in our group of friends, like, everyone would be like, "Oh, well, we all come from dysfunctional families except Nikki," and nobody knew, right? Even my wife didn't know. And we've been together for 30 years, and I just disclosed this stuff 2 years ago. So a lot of stuff to her now makes sense, and so the book talks about that. Then it leads into my recruit training, and how, one of the ladies who I knew on Civilian Street kind of protected me while I was there, and showed me how to hide in plain sight. Then I get into my first posting and what it was like to be a woman, to be sexually harassed, sexually assaulted, all this other stuff, and having to hide. And then, you know it basically hits every highlight, and it talks about the last couple of years of my life, whereby, I'm in this position with these men who just, there's hatred in their eyes, and for me to even get something across in that forum, a male had to back what I was saying, and that's sad, especially in today's day and age, because I wasn't there until 2019,
Right.
and we were still doing it, and they, I would watch them make decisions that morally went against everything I stood for, but because I was the minority, I had no say, and I suffered greatly for that because it affected people's careers, and I just didn't know what to do, and even when, the best time of my life was when I deployed to a foreign country for 4 years, and I went to a Muslim country on top of that, where homosexuality was against the law. And I brought my family, and I spent 4 years there. And that's where I learned to truly lead. Because I was putting on, and I think a lot of women do this, they put on this persona, and we try and lead like men, to fit in, but we're not men. And I was, doing this transactional leadership style that didn't fit me, and it always felt weird, right? And I was trying to be this A-type personality, and I'm not. I'm actually very shy. And I went to Indonesia, and I was working with our Department of Foreign Affairs, and I met some people there, that some civilian people that were amazing. And I learned then and there how to be a true leader. And I learned that not everyone had to be, a transactional leader. And that's where I learned about servant leadership. And I'll tell you, that fit me like a glove. And I came back, and that's who I was. And that's how I started to lead. And then I started to get all these followers that, wanted to ask me questions, because I was putting the subordinate first, and I was
Right.
putting the institution, behind the subordinate, not vice versa. And I came last, but I always wanted to make it better for people. So when I was silenced, I put pen to paper, and it debuted the 8th of November, 2023, and it has been in the top 3 on Amazon in Canada, since then.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been thinking about is you have to have 30% of people in a group to make change. So when you're one of 8, you're not 30, but you said if you could get someone else on your side, that starts to like turn the tide because then they might be able to get and like so yeah, when you're by yourself in a group, you could say whatever you want and they're just not going to listen. And so
Oh,
um that's why having more women, having more diversity, having more life experiences, especially at the top, really is important because those people make the most important decisions that affect everyone else. And if you only have, one demographic in that position, then
Yeah.
it's gonna not fit for everyone.
No.
So we're almost gonna run out of time, but I always like to end my interview, and I'll link to your book in the show notes so that people can grab it. But I want to end the interview with my advice question, which is, what advice would you give to young women who are considering joining the military?
Oh, I love this question. You know what? I think of myself as a young woman, and if somebody had said to me, you need to have a voice. You have to make sure that your voice is heard. You need to take your seat at the table, whatever table that is. You need to take your seat there. Be yourself and be honest with yourself and others. Um, and look around. Um, and make sure that you are doing the best that you can do. And if you are doing your very best, then you will be your very best. Because oftentimes when we look up, we like to see what right looks like. And sometimes we're looking up and we know as senior people, it's not right. But if you're entering and you're looking up and in your mind's eye, it doesn't look right, chances are it's not right. So don't replicate that behavior because that's how we get into the bad cycle. So yeah, the most important thing is be yourself and have a voice because nobody else is going to advocate for you. So push yourself.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your interview. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your book. I think it's so important that women share their stories because we need to hear those stories. So thank you for doing that as well. And just thanks so much for being a guest. I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you, Amanda. The one thing I do want to say about my book is a lot of women in Canada who read it reach out to me and say, "Thank you for telling my story." It's like you knew my story. And that's the sad part because at the end of the day, this was my story, but yet everyone else feels that it's theirs because that means it's happening more than what we thought it was. And
Yeah.
that's we want to stop that. We want to stop that behavior. So,
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much and have a great day.